how I arrived at the end of each day, the mindset that I exhibited, that's how the team responded.
Mm,
And very
mm.
early, I learned that if I arrived in and I was broken and I showed that, if I arrived like a beaten dog with my head down, the team would respond like that. But if I arrived feeling the same, but pumped my fist and celebrated at the end of another day, the whole team celebrated.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for leaders at every stage who want to stay relevant in a world that keeps changing. Leadership has shifted. The pace is faster, the expectations are higher, and the future is calling for a different kind of leader. One who is human-centered, grounded, and able to balance capability with empathy. These conversations bring together global perspectives on the skills and mindsets that help people and organizations thrive. Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I hope wherever you are listening to this conversation, you are well. Today's conversation is with Peter Baines, and before I tell you what he's done, I want to tell you how he thinks, because that's where the leadership lesson lives. Peter has a phrase he comes back to again and again. Leaders bring the weather. How you arrive, how you respond, the emotional climate you create when things are hard. That idea isn't theoretical for him, it's lived. Another line he lives by is this: whatever the conditions, they're my favourite. Not because the conditions are easy, but because wasting energy wishing they were different gets you nowhere. And that mindset was tested in the most extreme way imaginable. To mark 20 years since the Boxing Day tsunami, an event that changed his life and led to the creation of Hands Across the Water, Peter ran 1,400 kilometres across Thailand, 60 kilometres a day, 26 days in a row, in searing heat, in relentless humidity, through injury, infection, exhaustion, and moments where he was completely empty. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was very clear about that. He's not a runner. He didn't choose this because it was impressive. He chose it because it was uncertain, because success wasn't guaranteed, and because it was big enough to honour the lives lost and the children whose futures he has spent 2 decades protecting. What makes this story so powerful for leaders isn't the distance, it's how he did it. He talks about the days where he broke emotionally, about finishing every day with nothing left, about learning in real time that leadership isn't about powering through alone, it's about trust, it's about preparation, it's about letting go of control and allowing your team to carry you when you cannot carry yourself. He shares why complaining is a luxury leaders cannot afford, why focusing on what you can't change drains the energy you need for what actually matters, and why even when you feel broken, how you show up sets the tone for everyone around you. This conversation is about endurance, yes, but it's also about leadership under pressure, about the courage to keep moving when quitting would echo forever, about what happens when purpose, people, and preparation come together. If you lead people, if you are navigating uncertainty, if you are carrying responsibility when the conditions are tough and unpredictable, this conversation will meet you right where you are. Please enjoy my deeply human, deeply grounded conversation with the amazing Peter Baines. Hello, Peter Baines. Welcome back to Future Fit Leadership. We haven't had you on for a while. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and thanks for inviting me back. It's always lovely to return.
Well, you've just accomplished 2 big things, and we're going to talk about it. You've just released your 4th book, Together We Can, and it's based on a marathon that you ran for 1,400 kilometers about a year ago. And before we get into, the mental resilience you need to do something like that, I want to start by what made you want to run
Mm.
1,400 kilometers? What was the reason behind it?
Yeah, I guess a little bit of backstory to frame it is the 20-year anniversary to the tsunami was approaching, and that event had a dramatic impact on my life in that I would spend several months in Thailand leading the international teams in the identification of those who died, and then started the charity Hands Across the Water to support the kids, and that would overtake my life and continues to be the main focus of what I do each day, 20 years on. And so as the 20-year anniversary approached, I'd spoken to my wife and we'd talked about it and said, we need to do something significant.
Mm.
And ever since 2009, I've been leading charity bike rides in Thailand, and I've done 44 of them now, and they're wonderful. But I knew to mark the significance of the 20-year anniversary, a bike ride wasn't big enough.
Yeah, yeah,
And the idea of the run came to me, and I wasn't a runner, and I think one of the real appealing aspects of it was that completing and succeeding was far from anything but certain. And
mm,
it was so big that it was scary. I'd never done, the furthest I'd ever run before I committed to this was like 50 Ks in a 1 day ultra marathon. So to plan to run 60 kilometers a day for 26 days was, certainly breaking new ground. And, I think the uncertainty made it big enough to bring support and awareness. And yeah.
yeah. So, for those people who are new to listening to this podcast, we did a fabulous conversation with Peter. I think it was about 18 months ago or
Yeah.
so on Hands Across the Water and your experience with the tsunami 20 years ago and, how that impacted you and the charity you started. So, if you haven't listened to that, that's certainly something you need to listen to. So you've decided to do 1,400 kilometers, 60 kilometers a day, I think you just said. What was the training like? Because as you said, you're not a runner, you haven't done this before. So what did the
Mm.
training look like in the months beforehand?
I made the commitment, and when I made the commitment, I kept it to myself for a month, and because I thought,
Why
and
was that?
that was 2 years out, and I came out of the bedroom on this particular morning, having thought about it for a month, and I said to my wife, I said, this is what I think I want to do. I want to run from the home that we support in the northeast of Thailand called Ban Home Hug down to Ban Thum Nam Chai, which was the first home. And the reason I kept it to myself for a month was so that I wanted to make sure I didn't put it out there and then back away from it.
Yeah.
And soon as you put something like this out there, it becomes real, and you need to stand behind it. And so I shared it with her, and I think her response, that her immediate response was either going to see this live or die right then. And she said, I believe in you.
Mm,
And from that moment on, and that's all we all need, we just need that one person to believe in us. And knowing I had her support and knowing what she would bring, the rest was then about just running. And so I started training in the September of so 2023. So I gave myself about 14, 15 months of actual training. And there wasn't a lot of structure behind it to start with. I started looking for events where I could run long distances and organize trail runs and things like that. And then our bike rides in Thailand, I started running the last day
mm,
rather than riding, which was up to a 70K run. And that was really useful because it was in the conditions in Thailand. Then 6 months out, I picked up a coach by the name of Matty Abel, and that really changed my whole preparation and the whole run. And to be honest, if I hadn't have found Matty and if I hadn't engaged him, I don't know it would have been the success that it was.
mm,
And he just brought structure, logic, and science, I guess, into the preparation. And it wasn't necessarily about just continually running long distances, because you've got to maintain the enthusiasm over that long period. So 2 years is great. You've got a long time to train, but 2 years is difficult because
mm.
of momentum, enthusiasm, and it's a long time. But yeah, the training it was obviously lots of time on my feet. It was a long run once or twice a week. It was strengthening in the gym, and then in the August before, I was booked to speak at a conference in Thailand in the August, and took my father-in-law over with me, and I extended by a week, and I went out and ran back-to-back marathons for a week, and just to feel the conditions and feel what it was like backing up day after day. And that was a real learning experience for me because it showed the lack of dedication and preparation to what was so important, which was the nutrition and hydration and getting all of that right. Yeah, it was interesting. One of the learnings I took out of it, I have this saying that whatever the conditions, they're my favorite. And so in the training, like I was traveling for work a lot and all the rest, and I was running while I was in the snow in Japan. I was running in Singapore where the humidity is more oppressive than Thailand, and I just had this mindset that, and it served me well on the run because we were running in Thailand and we hit temperatures in 40
Mm.
degrees, and it was just hot every day, and the humidity was just incredible. But one of the things we never, as a team, spoke about not talking about the heat, but we never spoke about the heat, which was really interesting. And I think, I just had to accept that whatever the conditions, they were my
They
favorite
were your
because
favorite.
if we invest time in complaining about things we can't change, it's wasted energy. And the time and the energy was better spent in how I responded rather than complaining about the heat. Because, if I went out and started complaining about the heat and particularly running through the middle of the day when it was at its hottest, well, that's just becomes self-fulfilling
Mm.
and it gets worse and worse. So, yeah, so that was the lead in. And a couple of weeks before I was due to fly to Thailand, it almost all unraveled. I'd been running a leadership program for a client in Thailand, and I walked into a tree, and it
Oh,
was just cut off below the knee. It was only really a small stump, but I ended up with an infection. And a couple of weeks out from the beginning of the run, I was home at my farm, and I couldn't walk to the dinner table. I had this raging infection in my leg, and was taken to hospital and put on an IV. And 3 days later, the doctor said to me, "This infection's not getting any better. I think it's getting worse, and I think it's in the bone." And he said, "The run's off. You can't travel to Thailand. We'll have to put what's called a PIC line, goes into the vein straight into the heart." And he said, "You'll have that for 8 to 12 weeks, and it needs to be changed every day." And he said, "I'm sorry to tell you this runs off." Now, this is like 3 weeks out. And, I said to him, "Can I go to a different hospital?" And he said, "Sure, I'll release you," because I was at the regional hospital near our farm, wanted to get back to close to where we live. And he gave me a script for antibiotics. And it would meant that I would be on 3 lots of antibiotics. But he gave me the wrong script. And I
oh
didn't
no.
find out until I took these antibiotics, or what I suspected were antibiotics, and drove home from the farm back to Terrigal on the central coast of New South Wales, took more tablets. And then my daughter-in-law, who's a wound specialist, she contacted me and she said, "What medication have they put you on?" And I typed it out and sent it off to her. And then I drove to Sydney for a fundraising event, and she sent me a message and said, "You must have written that down wrong. You wouldn't be on those drugs." And I said, "Well, I'll send you a photo of the packet when I get home tonight." Got home 11:30 at night, took more drugs, sent her the packet. 6 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to drive to the local hospital to have this cannula put back in my arm and to get the antibiotics. And she rang me and she said, "Where are you?" She said, "Do not take any more drugs. You've got to get to the hospital, but you can't drive." And I said, "Well, I'm driving to the hospital now." And as it turned out, the doctor had mistakenly prescribed me with high blood pressure medication instead of
No.
antibiotics. Now,
How
my
did he do that?
well, my resting heart rate at that time sits in the mid 40s because of the training that I'd done. And he'd given me this medication which brings your heart rate down. And someone who had high blood pressure should be on 50 milligrams per 24 hours. He'd prescribed me 100
Oh
milligrams
my God.
3 times a day. So I was actually on 6 times the dose of someone with high blood pressure. And they immediately stopped it. And then there was a internal review conducted at the hospital into this, the mistake. And I'd hear from the medical director that if I'd taken it for one more night, I wouldn't have woken up.
You wouldn't have woken up. No.
No. So this was my lead in the month before I got to Thailand. So I actually got to Thailand still with an infection in my leg and not having been able to train for a month. So it made the first couple of days somewhat difficult. But, another learning for me was that we have to respond to the conditions we find ourselves in, not the ones we plan for. And it wasn't the last major distraction or hiccup that I would face. And we just needed as a team, and it was the team that got me through all of this, just needed to respond to what was before us.
Mm. And I want to talk about the team, but before we get there, I'm interested to know the changes in your physical self because, the training and then the running, and I know it was nearly a year ago you did it, but I'm interested to know how did you see your physical body change, your strength change, and then have you kept it up?
Yeah, so a really interesting question, one I've never been asked before, which is always nice to have new questions. But in the lead up till I got to Thailand, I didn't notice a huge change physically. Like my body weight, I probably dropped, a couple of kilos over the 12 months of training, which, was a healthy thing. And obviously, and that's the thing with running long distances is it's an incremental build up. So,
Mm,
you'd go for a 5K run and then I was running like 30Ks at a time. And so that was a gradual build up. So there obviously your body gets stronger. But the biggest change physically came on the run, and it was due to the conditions. So
mm,
I'm a world champion sweater. So if there's I just sweat like nothing else. And I was drinking between 15 and 20 liters of fluid a day. And I was still losing between 2.5 to 3 kilos a day. I'd put it back on overnight, but each morning at 4:30 when I woke up, we had a routine we'd go through, and part of it was a weigh-in. And then I'd weigh in at the end of the day, and there'd be this loss of between 2.5 to 3 kilos a day, which is just a sign of how much fluid
mm,
I was losing. So by the end of the run, I was down to 68 kilos, and now I sit like 12 months on, I sit at around 78 kilos. So,
mm.
that's an indication that, and the weight that I lost at, I certainly at that point where, you're bordering on that wasn't an ideal weight for,
No, no, it's not a
someone of
healthy, yeah,
no,
yeah.
somewhat of my frame, but I was also burning, we could see from the data, 4,500 calories a day. And and this was the biggest challenge of trying to eat enough and take in enough calories, because when you're in the midst of running, the idea of sitting down for a big meal is really difficult.
Yeah, yeah.
You have no appetite. But here's the catch 22. If you don't eat, you feel worse. And then you end up, and this is what happened in the August because it was just Chris and I, and it wasn't planned. I was vomiting while I was running. But during the month of December, when I actually did the run, I did not have one cramp, nor did I have one dehydration headache, which is all down to the way that the team looked after me and managed my nutrition and hydration.
Mm. I want to talk about the emotional well-being as well,
Mm.
because, we talk about mental toughness, we talk about resilience, But to do that run, the training and actually doing it, like were there days when you just broke and were there days when you were, going, I've got to just get through this, or am I
Mm.
pushing myself too far? I imagine mentally you either get really stubborn or you get to the other side where you just want to stop because you don't believe you can do it anymore.
So were there days where I felt broken? Every day.
Mm,
Every day. And the best word that and there was a video that was taken on one of the days where I just sat there and like through that month of December I cried a river of tears. It's and the word that best described how I finished each day was empty.
mm,
Like physically, mentally, whatever measure, I was empty. There was nothing left. And if you ever want to see emotion, stand at the finish line of a marathon or of an Ironman, and where people invest so much into what they're doing, and they go to places physically that brings them to the edge where they can stand and look over the edge. Well, I did that for 26 days. And day 14, it almost all fell apart, right? But I never questioned whether I wanted to stop. My coach said to me, the people who pull out of these really big things normally do so in the first 3 days. So for me, that was important to get through the first 3 days. And because of that disrupted leading I'd had, day two was a horrendous day. It was, I started in the dark, I finished in the dark, and I only running 60K. So that just shouldn't have happened. And it was just because I had lost so much of the fitness because of that month off. And I knew that first week or so would be rebuilding to bring the body back up.
mm,
And even, day 14, I ended up with, the most pain I've ever experienced and having to continue with shin splints that would eventually turn into what we suspect was a stress fracture. And I had to run with it. And even in the darkest day, I was running and I'm, crying. I got snot running out of my nose and I was in the worst mental space. Even that day, I didn't think about stopping. I just thought about how do I finish this 5 kilometre stage? How do I get to lunch? Then how do I get to the end? Because then the pain will stop. And I knew, and this was one of the biggest drivers, that if I quit, the pain of quitting would last a lifetime. The physical pain that I was experiencing at any time would be gone an hour after I stopped running.
it's incredible. You've spoken about the team a couple of times now, and you can never achieve this on your own. You have
Mm.
a plethora of people who help you get there. Talk to me about the team. Who did you put in place? Did they have certain skill sets? And then how do they support you over the run?
Yeah, so the team was just essential to it, and the book is called Together We Can, and it's so fitting because I hadn't planned this, but what happened was the first morning we walked down at 4:30 in the morning under the lights of the hotel. We huddled together as a team in a hug, and I thanked everyone for coming and their commitment and I don't know where it came from, but I just said, together we can. And that just became our catch cry. And then it advanced together we will. And then when we crossed the finish line as a team, we said together we did. So to answer your question, the first person was obviously my wife,
Mm,
and but she's the CEO of Hands, a charity. So it obviously made sense. And her background is in she was head of events for a large corporate. So she loves a spreadsheet and loves planning. And, I had to have her support. From there, the next people we went to were her parents. They're retired and I love them to death, and they're both such wonderful people. And I get on really, really well and work on the farm a lot with Chris, her dad, and I just knew that he would be the type of person that I'd want there.
Mm.
So we had them, and then a mate of mine who was a runner, unlike me, I reached out to him and said to him, did he want to come and run with me? And him and his wife joined us. He ended up on day 9 suffered a soft tissue injury and pulled out of the run for a week and joined a week after. And so there was them, and then we had our Thai staff. We had 3 Thai staff who were supporting us, and then a supporter of Hans who's a nurse, and she came along, and we, very quickly found our roles and found what we all had to do and in support. And I've never experienced a time in my life where I was so singly focused and allowed to focus on just one thing.
Mm.
Each morning, I woke up at 4:30, and Claire would pack down the room from that looked like a Chinese laundry with just all the washing through it and all of the kit. And every day we had to pack up a move. And she'd start by sticking needles in my feet to drain the fluid of the blisters, and that would be the start of the day. I'd dress, I'd walk over to our what we called our mothership, which was the van that followed us and was a kitchen and everything. And Wendy, my mother-in-law, would prepare breakfast. I'd eat breakfast, and then I'd run. At the end of the day of running, I'd sit down, hop in an ice bath, and then go to my room, shower, have these Normatec boots, relax, have dinner, and go to bed. Everything else was taken care of by the team.
Mm.
So I didn't have to think about anything. I didn't have to make decisions. I didn't have to worry about anything. And as I say, I couldn't have done it without every one of them that was there.
How did you, I guess, you lead an organization. I think for leaders, it's really hard to sometimes completely let go and rely on other people for everything that you do. And I'm
Yeah,
just listening to you describe that. You really did let go and
yeah.
rely completely on others. That sort of, how did you do that from a mental and emotional perspective? Because most of us in leadership positions like control.
Yeah, trust and preparation. I had complete trust first and foremost in my wife, knowing just how good she is at running events and looking after
Mm.
people. I knew that I didn't have to worry. The other thing was that we developed all of these protocols around what might happen. So I think we had these communication protocols so that if I got to a space where we had to consider worst case scenarios. So, who would have the conversation to say,
Mm.
you're doing damage? You can't continue. You need to stop. You need to go to hospital. The run's off. And we had to identify all of those issues and address all of those issues long before we got to Thailand, because you need to make those decisions and have those conversations without the emotion. And also, who could have those conversations?
In the middle of it all, you're focused on accomplishing this run. And if somebody comes and tells you to stop because you've got damage to your shins or
Yeah.
whatever, you're going to say no.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was the importance of those protocols and the language that the team could use,
Mm.
and who could make those calls. Because think about the person you love the most.
Mm.
If they're in pain and they're continuing to do something that puts them in pain and sees them in a crying mess each day, you want to stop. And so it was never a case that Claire was going to have that conversation with me. And we identified that it would be Chris and our medic. But we also identified what needed to happen before they could intervene.
Mhm.
And there was never, they weren't allowed to say, you've done great and it's time for a rest, or that there was never allowed to be anything other than supportive conversations. And we talked about, like, if I had 3 15-minute back-to-back kilometres that was an indication where they could intervene, because there's no way you should be taking that long. Something must be wrong. If I wasn't eating or drinking or urinating, or, these type of things were triggers where we could go, okay, if you don't do something that changes direction here, this is the next step. So it wasn't me struggling and someone walking up saying, okay, you're off the road now, without a chance to address it. So we had all of these protocols in place. And with on day 14, where I had this shin splint and it was just the most incredible pain, they just supported in a different way. And as an example, there was a lady, a monk who runs a Thai monk who runs the home up where I started from. And she rode her bicycle behind me for the entire distance. And often it was just me and her on the road. She was always between 5 and 7 meters behind. We didn't speak. I just ran. She was behind me. The only time I really saw her were when the dogs came out, and she would ride up and put herself between me and the dogs. This day, on day 14, as I ran, and the pain of the shin splint, because if you've had shin splints, you understand the pain. If you haven't, I describe it as someone taking a screwdriver and jamming it into the bone in your shin.
Oh,
They're not there, then they're there. Instant, and the pain stays every time you take a step. And I was running along the beach and I just got myself all worked up into this condition, and I stopped. And it was the first time in 14 days that I'd stopped running and or stopped moving
oh,
forward. And I leaned against this light post, and she could see the distress I was in. And she rang our team, because the model was the team would drive 5 kilometres on. I would run to them, and then I could take on fluids and salt tablets and food, change shirts, put sun cream on, and then run another 5K and repeat. So I had to have access to the water and all the rest. So that was the model, right? So the team's well up ahead and they're set up for lunch. And she rang the team and said, Pete's in real distress. You need to come back to him. And the team said, no,
oh.
he has to get to us. And that was exactly the right decision, because them coming to me just meant that I hadn't dealt with the situation, and I still had to get to the end of the day. And if they had responded differently, if they'd said, look, we can see the pain you're in, why don't you take the rest of the day off? Then that creates problems for the next day, where I've got to pick up another, 30 kilometers or so forth. So it was having all of these protocols in place and clear. And so to your question is, how did I release the control? It was because I had the trust, we knew the process, we knew the procedures, and all I had to do was run.
Gee, they're tough calls to make, Peter. I would
Yeah.
have broken down, sat in a
Oh,
corner
yeah.
and just broken down.
Well, it was funny the day that I came into lunch and I was in the worst state of the entire day, day 14. The crew who was driving, they had seen me because when Maythil, the Buddhist monk, made the call, the support car, because we had 3 cars, one of the cars came back, and they said they gave me pain medication, and they'd seen me before with the onset of it, but they had obviously driven on. Gave me some pain medication. We put some Voltaren gel onto my leg, and they just said, you just run, we'll drive behind you. You just stop whenever you want. And they could see how I was running with this, the pain in my leg. And Claire, my wife, she was at lunch, so she hadn't seen any of this. And then I arrived, and then she was doing the social media and promotion and all the rest. And she does this live video, and then she breaks down, because she said, that's the last thing she wants to see
Mm,
is me in so much pain. But it was, incredibly raw for everyone. It was
mm.
incredibly raw for everyone. And, a lot of the conversations that would have went on that lunchtime, I was never part of,
No, but it would have been, do we pull him
Oh,
out
yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure?
Like, and the concern from the team. But here's the thing, right? I got up from that lunch and I had 18 kilometers to go to the end of the day. And then we had to get in a car, drive 4 hours back to Bangkok, because I had a fun run the next morning that was in support of what we were doing. I was supposed to run 9Ks with these hundreds of people, then drive 4 hours back to where we were and start the day again. So I'm sitting there at lunch in this incredible pain, knowing the longer it took me to get to the end of that day, delayed the 4 hour drive back to Bangkok. And I stood up, and the only thing worse than running with shin splints was starting. And I had one of the Thai staff who is holding me up. I was in, so much pain, and just started to walk and then started to run. And then with 18 Ks, I should have stopped at the 13, the 8, the 4, and then got to the hotel. So there's 3 water stops. But I was so scared that day that if I stopped,
You
I
wouldn't
wouldn't be able
start.
to start. So I just kept running. And I had this soft 500 ml water flask in my hand. And it was a bit like the Tour de France, like I'd finish it and I just held it up. And Mayfield on the bike would ride up, get the flask, ride back to the car, which by this stage had changed. And they just said, you just stop whenever you want. Don't worry about the 5K, you just stop. And she would then ride back up with a new flask. And I ran and I ran and I got to the 13K mark, and instead of stopping, I just kept running because of this fear. And as I got towards the 8K mark, I went, I'm not going to stop. So I ran that entire 18 Ks without stopping, without any break, and her just refilling my flask. And when I got to the end, the emotion, and it's captured on video, and it's a beautiful memory for me, but the emotion in the entire team
Mm,
was just remarkable, the impact that it had. And we talk about leaders, and this was a real learning for me that leaders bring the weather, because how I arrived at the end of each day, the mindset that I exhibited, that's how the team responded.
mm,
And very
mm,
early, I learned that if I arrived in and I was broken, and I showed that, if I arrived like a beaten dog with my head down, the team would respond like that.
mm.
But if I arrived feeling the same, but pumped my fist and celebrated at the end of another day, the whole team celebrated.
Would do the same.
They looked to me to how they should respond, dependent upon how what I exhibited. And for me, it was such a clear learning, and didn't matter how I felt. Once I understood the impact I was having, that I celebrated the end of each day. I
Mm.
was broken, I was in pain, I was empty, but leaders bring the weather, and
I
how
love
we
that.
turn up, how we arrive, how we walk through the door, whether it's at home or in the office, it matters.
It matters. I'm interested to know, like throughout this journey, and incredibly, you've broken down, you've put yourself back together again, you've finished the run, you've written your book. Have you reflected and sat back and reflected and thought, these are the things that I've changed my understanding on about trust and leadership and businesses and leading people?
Yeah, you asked a question, and I don't think I answered it early on, was about the psychological impact of it. And
Mm,
in preparation for this, because of the tours I had done in a work capacity, working internationally in crisis and disaster, I know the impact of coming home where everyone's life is the same, but yours has been changed, and the impact of that. And I've experienced that many times in my career. And the fear was, how do I address that after this run, suspecting I'd go through something similar. And I got connected with a sports psych in the lead up to the run, and we spent a lot of time talking and sharing. And she said to me, I think you won't be as bad as you might have been, because one, you're aware of it, you've dealt with it before, and you've got a plan. And I got to tell you, within 40 hours of finishing the run, I was in the darkest place I'd ever been. And I was so down about where I was. And the thing was, I'd succeeded.
mm.
I achieved everything I set out to do. I ran this incredible distance that I couldn't comprehend at the time. And I still look at maps and go, how did I do
How did
that?
I do that?
and it was the same for my wife. Like we were both just so down, and we came to our farm in the weeks after, and we just walked around in silence, and sat in silence. And the thing that changed it for me was 2 weeks after finishing the run, we had to go back to Thailand to lead an 800-kilometer bike ride. And for me, I had to then change my energy because I was there hosting 50 people who were there to celebrate what for them, for many, was the hardest thing they'll ever do was this
Mm,
bike ride. And for me, for Claire and I, it was this beautiful journey of reflection of the because we followed the same route for the second half of the run, but we were on bikes, and the time passes a lot quicker on
yeah.
bikes than in a pair of hockers. But your question, has things changed? And you can't do this and not be changed. My understanding of hard has changed. The needle's been moved for me, but also an appreciation for, comparison is a thief of joy. So we can't compare ourselves. And I went through this in the lead up, looking at someone else doing a bigger run, raising a lot more money. Yeah, and I had this reflection of going, what am I doing? It's not big enough, and which is just ridiculous. But I've heard this from people when I speak. They go, I feel insignificant when I look at my
Mm,
life. And I go, that's not the outcome that we want, because when you compare yourself to someone else, you take away the thief of joy. But I think to your point is, how has it affected me and impacted me? And from a leadership point of view, it absolutely did. And I saw it on that bike ride in January, weeks after finishing, where previously I would have, when someone got into a difficult situation, I would have just said, hop into the support vehicle. It's okay. You've done a great job. But I know, I could tell, and I think that was more about getting them off the road, meant the tour could continue and I didn't have to worry about it. But, I was riding with a girl and from England, and she talked about this journey she would do once a week into London, a couple of hours. And I rode her and she wanted to stop. And I said to her, if you want to stop, you can stop. But in 2 months' time, when you're on that train from the
mm,
north into London, you will regret stopping. I said, the pain that you're experiencing on the bike now, in 20 minutes, that'll be finished because we'll get to the end. And it was this, I think patience and understanding that, and this was the other thing that, when we feel like we've got nothing else to give, we're probably only 40% of the way there.
mm,
And we give up not because our bodies let us down, it's because we've decided to give up.
mm. How did you feel when you went through the finish line? And interestingly more, did it get harder the couple of days beforehand, knowing that you were at the finish line? Were they the hardest days?
No, they were the best. And what had happened is, and it just fills me with such joy to talk about it, was two of my three kids and their partners and my ex-wife, they came across for
Beautiful.
the end of the run, and they arrived on the evening of the 23rd of December. And what we'd done is, in the planning of the run, I'd only ever planned it over 25 days. So we started the 1st of December, and I had to finish on Boxing Day to meet the 20-year anniversary. But I only planned the distance over 25 days to give me a day up my sleeve if I needed to, for some reason, I could extend the run and still finish.
Mm-hmm.
But as we got through, we didn't need to. So what it meant was that, and I'd front end loaded the kilometres. So the biggest days were in the first couple of weeks. So as we got towards the back end in the last, 4 or 5 days, the kilometres were decreasing. So the kids arrived on the evening of the 23rd of December, and we arrived at this place where it's called Clifton River Resort in Khao Sok, and we stay there every time we do the bike ride. And it's this beautiful jungle resort on the river and with a pool. It's just spectacular. And every night of the run, we'd stayed in a different hotel. But in the planning for the last 3 nights, we stayed at the same hotel. And then that meant on the final day, we would drive to the start of the run and then run to the finish.
Hmm.
We had Christmas Day at this hotel. And what it meant was that we were able to split Christmas Day and Boxing Day in half. So they were like 25 and 26 kilometers. And we got to the hotel, the kids arrived. I didn't know that they were there. I jumped into the pool fully clothed at the end of the run because arriving at this hotel felt like it was done. Everything was done. I had, I had 150 Ks to go over 3 days or so forth, or even less, and 100 Ks to go with 3 days to run. So it was the victory lap. And
Yeah, yeah.
the next day we ran 48 kilometers and my two kids ran the entire distance with
Oh,
me.
beautiful.
Then Christmas Day, my wife and my two kids ran the entire distance with me. We had kids from the home that we supported came out and ran. Boxing Day, we all ran the full distance, and we got to a temple which is 3 kilometers from the finish, and it's called Wat Yen Yao. And for me, it's the ground zero of temple of Thailand. It was where there was 3,500 decomposing bodies when I arrived, and to arrive at the temple was the finish of the run with then 3 kilometers to the home. And so we arrived that day having run 26 Ks with my wife, my two kids, and Greg, and ran in. The police had shut down the road, and we got to the temple, and there was a huge celebration. And then we ran from the temple to the home, and it was 4K. And I was really clear that I wanted the entire team that had been with me for those 26 days on the road for that final 4Ks. So those driving, they parked the cars. We had other people pick up the car so we could all run. That was the plan. But there was a number of people on the team who 4Ks was significant to run. And we also had a couple of hundred members of the local community and sponsors and supporters who wanted to run that distance. And it became like we set off on that final couple of Ks, and it became almost dangerous where people were running so close trying to take selfies as we're running. And I think if people are going to fall over here, and
Yeah.
we're trying to keep our team together, and it was just a nightmare. So I ended up, the only way to get rid of everyone was just to increase the pace. So I increased the pace, and then I got to probably the last 100 meters before the finish line, and I stopped everyone. And it was like, in Forrest Gump when he finally stopped running and all these people behind him and they just stop and go, what's happened? And I stopped and I put out my hands and to stop anyone going further to the finish line. And then the 10 crew that had been running with me, we'd got changed into running shirts at the temple and we're all in these yellow running shirts. Everyone else was in this shade of blue, and it doesn't matter why. But so as I could see our team coming forward, we got the whole 10 of us across the road and we all held hands and we walked the last 100 meters and crossed the finish line together. And I was, you know, for 2 years, I'd gone to bed every night thinking about the
Oh.
finish, but we'd never planned what the actual finish would be like. And even during the run, we still weren't clear where we would finish as to there or another location. So I'd done zero planning around what the actual finish would be like. But I knew um, that it was never going to be me running through this finisher's tape with my arms up in celebration, because that would be so disrespectful to what we had achieved together.
Mm.
So we all crossed the finish tape together, the 10 of us lined across the road, and it was such a beautiful and fitting conclusion and moment that, I'll remember for the rest
You'll
of my
remember forever.
life.
I have to ask, are you doing anything else now that you've finished this one? Is there
Mm.
something else that you're cooking up?
Well, funny you ask. My son said to me at the time, he said, I'll run the next anniversary for you, meaning he would do that 1,400 kilometer run in 10 years' time
Yeah.
for the 30-year anniversary. And I said to him, well, I won't be running 1,400 kilometers in 10 years' time. And then we were at his wedding in October of this year and in New Zealand. And my wife was reading the book, Together We Can. And she was getting towards the end of the book. And she said, I'm really sad that the book's coming to an end because that means this whole journey has
Mm.
come to an end. And she said, it's sad that that's the biggest thing we'll ever do. She said, do you think we'll ever do anything like that again? And then she said, good night, closed the book and went to sleep. And I lay there for hours looking at the ceiling going, what are we doing? Are we doing it again?
Yeah.
And so we got planning, and I chatted to my son and said, if you were to do it again, if you were to do it, what's your time frame? And
Mm.
so in 2028, we're going to do it, but we're running. It's at the moment it's called the Three Homes Run. We're going to run uh, from the north. We'll start at the same place, but we'll run down the border of Cambodia to another home that we look after, which is out towards Pattaya, and then we'll run under Bangkok, then pick up the southern part of the run I did. So it's about 1,700 kilometers, so it's 300 kilometers
Oh.
more. And at the moment, I'm still undecided as to whether we do it in the 26 days and we increase our daily distance or we increase the number of days on the road. But um, that's what we're committed to do. It's probably a year off than I would like, but because of his travel plans, and it does give us significant time to plan it because we're going to open it up. Because I had a number of people in the lead up to 2024 who said, "Can I come and run with you?" And for different reasons, we'd said no, and we said, "Okay, what about this time if we opened it up to people who want to do it as a team?"
Mm.
And who want to run this in a four-person relay where they get to run, say, 20 kilometers at a time, as part of a four-person team and cover the same distance. And or for people who go, I'd like to run 1,700 kilometers. And so we haven't launched it yet. We're still in the building and development stage, but it's locked in my diary.
You locked it and locked it in your son's diary by the sound of it as well.
Yeah, yeah. And we've got the crew back together. My
Great.
wife will be the race director, and we had dinner with our in-laws or my in-laws a few weeks ago, and I didn't know if they'd be keen again. And my wife said, "Okay, we're doing the run again. Who wants to come?" And my mother-in-law shot her hand up straight away and said, "I'm in." And so we've got the core group back together, and yeah, it'll be amazing. There was lots of learnings, and surprisingly though, there's so little that we would change.
Mm.
Like there's so little that we look at it and go, "Oh, imagine if we did this. It'd be better this way or this way." So little that would change, which I think is testament to the planning and the crew.
Mm. Well, congratulations. It's an
Thank you.
incredible story. The book's called Together We Can, where you write about the time on the road. For those people who don't know, maybe just give us a background on Hands Across the Water.
Yeah, so as I said at the beginning, it was I started Hands after my work in Thailand as a forensic investigator. Met a group of kids who'd all lost their families and thought, I'll build them a home and their problems will be over. Quite naively so, I thought. Built them a home and realised the journey had just begun. We're now 20 years on and we've raised over $40 million. We've put 56 kids through university. We run a number of properties across Thailand, and we're about brighter futures for kids and creating life of choice for them. And it's been a long time since it was tsunami related.
Mm.
That was just the
That was a
purpose.
start. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's It's doing amazing things. It has been for many years the largest contributing Australian charity to Thailand, and it fills my day every week, and I take so much from it.
A lot of my friends have done the ride with you, so I know about the work that you do quite intimately. If people want to connect with you and find out more or be involved in the run in 2 years' time, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, it's probably like if they're interested in hands and our bike rides that we do every year, which is a lot more achievable than the run, that's for sure. And we were saying before we hit record, my January started with our one of our first bike rides, and it was just such a beautiful, calm ride with lots of people who have ridden with us so many times, and they're a really inclusive bike ride. There's e-bikes that people ride that makes it open to a lot more. And if people want to learn about that, we do our January bike rides every year, and they're open to the public. And that's through handsacrossthewater.org.au. If they want to learn more about the run and what I've done and the 4 books I've written, that's through peterbaines.com.au.
Okay. Well, congratulations again. Thank
Thank you,
you
Sarah.
for sharing that with us. And I look forward to talking to you and your son again in a couple of years' time after
Yeah,
you've done the
wonderful. We'll have
next
another
ride.
story to tell.
I'm
Yeah.
sure you will. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks so much.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate, and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.